Today on the Playbook podcast, I have some exclusive reporting on President Donald Trump's redistricting pressure campaign in Indiana, a preview of Trump's slated meeting with New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani today, and former President Barack Obama embraces a new role, mentor-in-chief. Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Nick Reisman. It's Friday, November 21st.
And without further ado, here's what's driving the day. Well, Nick, I'm not sure how close you've been paying attention to what's happening in Indiana in the middle of the country, but over the last week, it's been pretty wild. President Donald Trump has been targeting on Truth Social Roderick Bray. He's the Indiana Senate president who has been resistant to the president's overtures to engage in mid-cycle redistricting, opening up the maps and redrawing them to potentially get 2 congressional districts out of the Hoosier state next November. And Roderick Bray is an institutionalist. And Nick, I spent time with Roderick in his office this week, and he shared with me a few interesting takeaways. He said that largely his conversations with the White House, with President Trump, with Vice President Vance have been cordial until this last call that they had last Friday, when President Trump was very angry. The other interesting thing that Roderick Bray told me is that, he's essentially opposed to this redrawing because what he wants Republicans to do is to focus on the 1st congressional district. It's in Northwest Indiana, up by Chicago. It's been trending red for a while now. He just thinks that Indiana Republicans can flip that congressional seat the old-fashioned way by winning an election. And so he's told President Trump that. Nick, I'm curious, you're in New York. What do you make of the way that the redistricting wars are playing out, particularly after the off-year elections that saw California really score a victory for Democrats?
Well, definitely in a blue state like New York, there has been this real kind of push and pull between Democrats over what exactly to do on redistricting. There had been an effort that was largely seen as being driven by the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, a Brooklyn resident, by the way, who really does want to try to maximize potential Democratic gains going into 2026. And so there was this whole effort to try and find a way to open up New York's redistricting process. That's very difficult to do. One thing I'm really interested in that you mentioned with Roderick Bray, Adam, was that he's an institutionalist. And I'm just curious if there's also the element of President Trump right now, maybe not quite a lame duck yet, but he might be soon in the next year or so. How much of his calculus isn't just the institutional aspect of things, but also this concept that, Trump eventually is going to not be president anymore. And the Republicans, not just in Washington, but also at the state level, are going to have to start preparing for a post-Trump Republican Party.
Nick, that's a great question. And it's really interesting because this whole effort to redraw maps across the map this year is really based on the idea that Trump's 2024 margins are going to hold in 2026. And so, there are Indiana Republicans like Roderick Bray that look at these 2024 margins and the projections that they can draw, 9 districts in Indiana. Currently, the congressional split here is 7 Republican seats, 2 Democratic seats. And they look at these 2024 margins and they say, are you serious? You really think that these margins from 2024 are going to hold in 2026? At a time when, a number of different pieces of data are saying that Democrats are significantly ahead in the generic ballot. And so, the math here to them and opponents of Trump's redistricting scheme is a little murky. Instead, what's happening right now, Nick, is that we're seeing MAGA go after and announce primaries this week of sitting Republican senators in a state where Republicans have a supermajority in the Senate. And they're essentially putting that supermajority, up to the exposure of potential losses. And so there's a scenario where MAGA and MAGA allies and White House allies spend more money primarying Senate Republicans than they do and actually trying to flip the 1st congressional district. And, what's super fascinating is that 3 seats could determine control of Congress next year. And two of them are in reliably red Indiana, a state that voted for Trump by 20 points last November. And so Trump is understandably vexed why this can't get done.
It's just so fascinating because at least in a state like New York, a decade ago, this whole idea of nonpartisan redistricting, of preventing gerrymandering, is scanned as this Democratic Party issue because they felt like if they had drawn these lines fairly, then they would have full control of the state Senate here in New York, and they would also be able to pick up some House lines. And it certainly seems now like, you hear talking to institutional Democrats and establishment Democrats in a state like New York, and they use phrases like, well, we don't want to unilaterally disarm, treating this deeply polarizing event of partisan redistricting as an arms race. And in many respects, it has become part of the national arms race in this kind of cooling, cultural civil war that we're kind of engaged in right now with our politics. I'm wondering if in Indiana there is that sensation, or that thought at least, that we're kind of buying an insurance policy here, but that doesn't necessarily mean the roof isn't going to leak at some point.
Yeah, and certainly pro redistricting advocates, see that as an insurance policy. But what's really fascinating is one of the arguments against redistricting, I should say, is that it's unpopular in Indiana. But what they would really say is that Indiana has a sense for fairness, that Hoosiers understand they like to play by the rules. But what's surprising to me is there's a new political poll that shows Democrats and Republicans support withdrawing congressional districts nationwide to give their side a boost in the midterms. So this is contra to what we're seeing here in Indiana. And Nick, apparently there's no apparent appetite for a ceasefire in the gerrymandering wars. And most voters on the left and right favor using partisan redistricting not just to level the playing field, but as a weapon to help them win. Is everything just partisan now?
It certainly seems that way, right? I mean, especially with an issue like control of Congress. And at this point now, we're only kind of seeing these lines move maybe in one direction for one election, and then in another direction, another election. You mentioned Democrats leading the generic ballot for those House races going forward. It's going to be really interesting to see just how much money is going to start pouring into some of these races. I mean, in some respects, we're really only talking about a handful of House seats that are going to determine the control of the House of Representatives next year. But also, let's face it, the final 2 years of Trump's presidency, too, as you mentioned, how much of his agenda will he be able to get done going into 2027 and in 2028? Or is he going to be kind of mired in congressional investigations that a Democratic majority will be able to wield?
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm most excited, Nick, to have you on the podcast today to talk about this next story. We have a significant meeting of New Yorkers in Washington today. Mr. Mamdani goes to Washington. What can you tell us about what you're watching here on this agenda item? What do you expect in this clash of personalities?
It's really fascinating that you have two guys, President Donald Trump, Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, both New Yorkers, as you mentioned, both Queens guys, who represent vastly different parts and aspects of New York City. Trump, steeped in the 1980s, real estate magnate, someone who kind of cut his teeth in an era when New York City was obsessed with success and wealth. And here you have Zohran Mamdani, an upstart 34-year-old who was able to propel his candidacy based on a lot of the hangover from the excess of the 80s and 90s and 2000s of a successful city that for many people feels increasingly unaffordable. So you have those two diametrically opposed political figures right now, both of whom did run on the cost of living and affordability. And they're sitting down in the Oval Office. It's a major home court advantage for President Trump. He's got a huge power imbalance, or Mamdani does, that he's going to be dealing with. Trump obviously has not been shy about trying to put his thumb on the scale in his hometown. There have been efforts by Mamdani to show that he is going to be not a rabble rouser once he's in office. All of that said, Mamdani wants to talk about affordability. I'm going to be curious to see if Trump himself wants to talk about affordability. And that is going to be very, very fascinating just to see if Trump is going to make any veiled threats or if Mamdani is going to try and walk in there and upturn the apple cart.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The thing that I'm watching here, Nick, is Trump has this innate radar for talent, for buzz, and he saw that in AOC. And there's some reporting that he sees the same in Mamdani. And I'm curious, do you think Mamdani has the presence of mind and the skills to sort of navigate what could be potentially a trap set by Trump here for him?
That is a really good question. I think that's one that Mamdani's people are probably contemplating in part. I think the mayor-elect was actually asked about this on Thursday, and he says, "Look, I'm here in a good faith effort to talk to him about an issue that we both care about, and that's the cost of living." One potential template that Zohran Mamdani can look to is actually the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, who is very much not a politician in the Zohran Mamdani mode. She's a moderate Democrat from the Buffalo area. She is very much an establishment figure. But in an interesting twist, she has also kind of forged this surprisingly quiet, very good working relationship with the president. But Kathy Hochul has been able to kind of effectively negotiate her way around these very nettlesome issues with Trump. And her team is not exactly thrilled with the idea of saying Kathy Hochul is great working with Donald Trump, just because her base obviously really does not appreciate the idea of anybody kind of working hand in glove with Donald Trump. But she has had to navigate these Trump politics. And Zohran Mamdani potentially has a template here and a path forward, someone who he can publicly fight with and privately still say, well, okay, we're going to still deal here. A lot of people who talk to Trump in private say, look, this is a very different guy than the one you see in the rallies. He's not as bombastic. He can be a little bit more accommodating. He can also try to remind you of the leverage that he holds over you. And I would not be surprised if we see that in the Trump meeting with Mamdani at the Oval.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you talk about back channeling with a president. There's another former president who's been back channeling with Mamdani, and that is, of course, former President Barack Obama. He's had calls with Mamdani to praise him and his ability to go everywhere and promote his message, and for the campaign that he's run. And we know that Barack Obama is really on a mission, Nick, to build the bench. He told the podcaster Mark Maron that he really wants to become more of a coach and less of a player. Former President Barack Obama met with nearly 36 freshman House Democrats at the Capitol home of Representative Rosa DeLauro at a Wednesday night event hosted by former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The event saw Obama, meet with people like Representative Sarah McBride of Delaware and praise her efforts going everywhere. Her interview with Ezra Klein, it saw Obama really try to rally the troops. And he made an interesting comparison, Nick. He talked about everybody was familiar with his 2004 DNC convention speech, but not a lot of people remembered 2005 when Democrats were last in the wilderness. And then from there, he made the comparison that from that moment, we got Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He became president. Democrats, made significant gains in the halls of Congress and their power. And so he's really trying to help freshmen understand that there's a path out of the wilderness here if they choose to take it. What do you make of the role, Nick, that Obama has played over the last year?
I think it's also kind of a story about how there's very little natural leadership right now for the Democrats nationally. Zohran Mamdani, in particular, he's asked frequently, are you going to be the voice of Democrats now going forward nationally? And he insists he wants to focus on New York City, which, by the way, is probably the right answer for him at this moment. But is it Bernie Sanders? Is it Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Is it Kamala Harris? Is it Barack Obama? I think a lot of rank and file Democrats right now who are hungry for some sort of leadership and a way out of the political wilderness after the debacle of 2024. At minimum, this sounds like a pretty good pep talk from the former president for a guy who, was able to kind of skyrocket his way out of Congress and into the presidency.
Well, Nick, thanks so much for being here.
Take care.
And that's all for today's show, but we have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back Monday. Have a great day.